You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
This sounds really weird, and I learned this from Neil Gaiman, but he just made a list of all the things he wanted to do, and then he just did the next thing on the list. It was write a comic book, write a novel, write a movie. He just I have a list of things I want to do, literally a list. Relaunch Film Threat, launch the Film Threat Podcast Network, create the Film Threat app, complete the Film Threat documentary, finish the Film Threat book, which I'm writing a book about my experiences doing Film Threat magazine in the 90s. It's called Film Threat Sucks. That's also the title of the documentary. And then after that, make a movie with an iPhone. So I just have a list of things I'm doing, and just everything I do kind of just goes toward those goals.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining me for another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. Recording this intro on my phone, sort of what I did while I was in New York City in April, so I hope this turns out okay. I hope the quality is all right. But in some good news, I got Audition CC working again, so it'll probably not work next weekend, but for some reason it's not working right on my computer. And I keep battling, and Adobe doesn't care, so whatever. Anyways, it's September 11th, and, I just want to say that if you're going to do something, if there's one thing you take away from September 11th, some people take away patriotism, some people take away nationalism. If there's one thing I can say, it's just do this. Do what you want to do. Meaning go follow your dream, follow whatever you've been meaning to do. As I talked to Chris Gore in this episode, we talk a lot about, goal setting and, doing what you want to do on your terms, because life is short. And, just to tie this in with what happened last night on September 10th, CM Punk, who was a former WWE wrestler, entered the UFC at the age of 37, and he proceeded to just get absolutely obliterated by his opponent, Mickey Gall. And I know everyone's wondering why I'm talking about UFC on a filmmaking podcast, but I've been involved in martial arts since I was in my teenage years, and I used to be a big wrestling fan, so I'm familiar with CM Punk. And a lot of people gave him shit for going into UFC. I think it's great that he followed his dream and did what he wanted to do. Now, after that fight, it's very evident that he doesn't have what it takes to compete at a very good level. I'm not talking about an elite level. I'm talking he should probably go back to the amateur ranks. But at least he tried. And at least he gave it all he had, and I'm sure he'll be back, but I don't think he'll ever be at an elite level. So where am I going with this? For all of you listening to this, I really urge you to go out and do whatever you want to do in terms of art. I know a lot of you listening to this are either writing a screenplay, or you're going to make a movie, or you're going to write a graphic novel. Do it now. Honestly, the best time is yesterday, but the second best time is today. And just get started working on it. I'm not saying go out there and just haphazardly throw it together. I know that's what some other filmmaking advice, that some people have heard before. I'm saying just actually make a plan and follow through with that plan, and realize that you have to start setting these goals. You have to start putting these benchmarks in there to see how you're progressing, and you have to actually start getting out there and doing stuff and meeting people, and then you can start putting together that movie. Because writing a screenplay versus making a movie are two different things. So if you're going to write a screenplay, make sure you have your goals in mind. And if you're going to make a movie, you have to have a really good script. You have to have a really good team. And believe me, if you want to talk about, putting together a good team, listen to my episode with Jenna Edwards, because her and I was actually thinking about that conversation a couple days ago, and her and I talked about finding people that you can work with. That is so true. Some of you heard when I was making my TV pilot, and you've heard me talk about it throughout the episodes here, and just the amount of problems I had while making that with my producers. Some producer was, not even functioning. Another producer was, not even really qualified to be a producer. And, everyone says, well, why didn't you fire them? And that's a whole nother story, which I hope to go into one day about why I couldn't fire them. And, one day, I'll go into detail. Maybe I'll even have somebody on there who worked on the TV pilot on here as a guest, and maybe we can go into that. But I want to wish you all a fantastic day, and please, hopefully you've taken something away and listen to this episode, because it really is a lot to it. And, Chris has been punching away at this for years upon years now. And I remember him from Attack of the Show and all that good stuff. So enjoy this episode, everybody. Follow your dreams. My next guest ran a DVD Tuesday on Attack of the Show, where he worked on G4. He ran Film Threat Magazine, and now he's starting a Kickstarter to relaunch Film Threat Magazine. This is episode 126 with Chris Gore.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks a lot.
So, Chris, you've done a lot in independent film. You've co-written My Big Fat Independent Movie. You have several books out on the subject, and right now, as a matter of fact, you have a Kickstarter campaign to save Film Threat. You've done all of this, really great stuff, which I hope we can get into in the allotted time. But, just to start off, I wanted to ask, how did you get started in independent film?
Oh, man, I don't know. I think it was just like real simply seeing the movie Star Wars when I was a kid and wanting to know. It was the first movie I saw where I wanted to know about the making of the movie, So when that movie came out, it was like I just grabbed every magazine. We're talking about print magazines at the time, and just read them voraciously. I wanted to know who the filmmaker was, George Lucas. I wanted to know everything about him, the processes. And when you look back at Star Wars, the original Star Wars, 1977, that movie was like a demonstration of every possible filmmaking technique that existed up until that time was utilized in the making of that film. So it's really like you could take a film class where you just teach how they did everything in Star Wars and pretty much know how to do anything, at least in filmmaking up until that period. So it was a great learning experience. And then from that, I got a Super 8 camera, and I was doing like animated movies. So I was making like little stop motion animated movies. I've done stop motion since I was 9. So that was sort of like my first foray into it. And then it was learning about these like interesting independent films that were being made. I mean, the term independent really didn't exist until 1989, but I really love like cult films, underground films, genre films. It was just like, and at that period, it's not like, you're 2 clicks away from watching any movie, including movies that are playing at the theater now, if you know where to look. But back then, you had to like know a guy and send a self-addressed stamped envelope off to some place in Florida where you'd get a list of movies that you could buy on VHS for like $20, or you found out about a rep theater that had like a John Waters Film Festival. So it was like a struggle back then to actually try to see anything that was alternative.
Yeah, Chris, I was born in the 80s and I grew up in the 90s, and I remember, VHS, and I remember, just going down to the local video store, like not like Blockbuster or even like Hollywood Video, but it was the local independent video stores. And they would have all the stuff that Blockbuster would never carry, and we would get some of these like really cool movies. And I was like, I've never heard of this stuff. And you would have to look at the box art, and that made like 90% of your decisions, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. What's so funny is there's been this like weird resurgence in like VHS. There are VHS collectors, and it's unbelievable to me how many VHS movies never actually were transferred onto DVD, and then obviously aren't on Blu-ray or even digital. So there's a whole like huge library of films that actually are being wiped away and can only be found on video. So it's weird. Like I was at Monsterpalooza in Pasadena recently, and there was this group, this sort of VHS collectors group, and I picked up, you'll have to actually Google this to find it, but it's a movie called Vasectomy the Movie. and it stars Paul Sorvino and Abe Vigoda. And it has the craziest kind of – it looks like a Jack Davis painting on the cover. But I don't know. I love seeing like this weird like I didn't even know this movie existed type of thing. Like I love that. So I don't know. Like I love that like cool – because I have like a collector mentality about stuff. So –
yeah, I've noticed that slowly but surely people are uploading those to YouTube.
Yes.
And the reason
Good.
Yeah, because the reason I just bring that up is because there was this. You remember in the 80s and some of the 90s, the home video market also had another niche, and that niche was like the how-to videos, like how to be a magician. And remember everyone, you remember all that stuff? Like, you could go the whole wall. Well, I have a friend. He has a ton of these, and he got them all when one of these video stores was going out of business. He bought a whole lot of these, right? So we started like just duping these because people would ask for them because sometimes it's for the fun laugh factor at some of these things.
Yeah, well, but the older ones for sure.
Yeah, because nobody. I mean, these have never been on DVD. They're not available anywhere for digital download, legit or otherwise, and they're certainly not on Blu-ray. So he was just taking these VHS tapes and duping them and just saying, like he was just uploading them to YouTube, and people were sending him messages saying thank you so much. I remember renting this movie years ago, and just when I was a kid, and I never heard about it since, But that's where I'm starting to find that YouTube has become a source of like some of these especially rare and hard to find horror movies.
Well, yeah, actually, technically speaking, YouTube's biggest category in terms of numbers is how-tos. So rivaling even cats. So there you go. Yeah.
It's hard to beat cat videos now.
Yeah, no kidding. But how-to videos like, and tutorials, like that is the biggest category. If I don't know how to do something and I'm frustrated with a piece of software on my computer, the first place I look is YouTube, a YouTube tutorial, and I can find something in 5 or 10 minutes. I've figured it out. So, I hope that people actually do take these VHS classics and start putting them up on YouTube for free. Because if they're not commercially available to see, I don't have a problem with someone like throwing stuff like that on the internet. If you can't obtain it legally by purchasing it, it should be preserved in some form. So it's kind of cool to see YouTube turn into this sort of crowdsourced thing for rare stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree because, I found a rare VHS copy on there a couple days ago. I don't even know if you remember this, but Linda Blair from The Exorcist hosted a revenge VHS series. And basically it was all about – she hosted it, right?
Oh, my God.
And it was all about how to get revenge on people. And – it wasn't like this very, nice way, like, hey, put a fake spider in your sister's drink or something like that. Like, it's legit ways to screw people's lives. Like, there's a guy on there. I remember because again, with that video store as a kid, I remember my friend rented it, and there's a PI talking about like, hey, if you really want to screw him over, here's how to get a fake death certificate, and we'll send it to the IRS. And I'm like, holy shit! Like, they're really screwing people.
That's like illegal. I mean, so that's hilarious. Oh my God. Wow.
But it's up on YouTube right now, the whole thing. And for everyone listening, I'll put that in the show notes. But
wow.
Don't actually try anything like that.
Wow.
But yeah, it's it's that whole market now, and that's why I think stuff like Stranger Things and all this nostalgia. I think people still finally remember the 80s, and I think Stranger Things is proof of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that 90s nostalgia is right around the corner. I mean, it's coming, if not soon. So that's
yeah. Yeah, and have you gotten a chance to see Stranger Things, by the way?
Of course, watched the whole thing, loved it. I love it because I saw something recently. People were talking about like these reboots, right? Like Ghostbusters being rebooted. And which I thought was a terrible movie. It had nothing to do with the fact that it was an all-female Ghostbusters. That was irrelevant. And those actresses are all incredibly talented. I mean, I'm fans of. I mean, Melissa McCarthy's Spy, which was the movie Paul Feig made before Ghostbusters, was brilliantly funny. But I don't know that we need to do reboots. I think that what Stranger Things did so well is it sort of hearkened to and tone-wise was like things things that are familiar, but it didn't try to reboot anything. It didn't, and it didn't rip them off in a way that was very blatant where you went, oh, that's not inspired. It kind of like did what George Lucas is so good at, or was so good at with the original Star Wars, where he put everything in a blender and it was an influence of all these really cool things. And same thing with Tarantino, who's really good at kind of, taking a blender and throwing a whole bunch of things together and making it feel fresh and original. That's what Stranger Things did. It took things like a lot of things from the 80s that we're familiar with and just, made them feel fresh and new. And it didn't feel like a ripoff of anything, and it didn't have to be a reboot. We don't need to see a remake of E.T. ever, right? I mean, so I think that Stranger Things kind of tapped into that. And it's like, if they had made a movie about a bunch of women who fight ghosts, you could have actually not called it Ghostbusters and just did a completely different comedy. You know what I mean? Like that didn't rip off Ghostbusters, but there was something new and original.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually didn't see the new Ghostbusters. I really didn't have any interest either way in seeing it. And most of the people that I know that saw it, most didn't like it.
Yeah, well, I think the problem with that movie is the way that modern comedies are made, which is, let's get funny, people. We'll have a loose script and then, just be funny, and then we'll cut it into something that's coherent. And I think people forget that the original Ghostbusters movie was something that script was in development for years. And it was a very tight script. And Dan Aykroyd has this incredible passion for, for the spirit realm and ghost and actually technology related to tapping into that environment. Like all that science behind Ghostbusters is stuff that like Dan Aykroyd personally is into. So it's kind of cool, like how much he put into it, and the reason that the Ghostbusters was made by Sony with this female cast was to make money. It wasn't about any passion to create something fresh and original. And I think when you look at something like Stranger Things, the original Ghostbusters, when you look at like why something is made is really important. That's why those last two Spider-Man movies were so god awful, because they were made because they had to rush and make a Spider-Man movie so they could hold on to the license. Same thing with that last Fantastic Four movie. Like, oops, we got to make this movie for a legal reason. That's not a good reason to make a movie ever.
Yeah, I concur. The last Fantastic Four, it did feel almost like two movies combined.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean?
The first half was actually kind of cool. Like, oh, this is interesting. I think that the first half is, what Josh Trank was going for. You know what I mean? Like, let's make something let's make something original. Let's make something different. Let's and then that second half is just a train wreck. I feel bad for him because he got the brunt of the blame, but they kind of screwed him over by just keep continuing to cut the budget.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree with you completely. It felt like the first half was good, and the second half was just kind of like, oh, it's going in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, because you know what it's so, but I know as we talk about remakes, and one thing, and I'm shocked this hasn't been remade yet.
What?
Because just because that this, the times we live in, the zeitgeist of the times with all the technology and everything, I am shocked that they're not trying to remake Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, also like the fact that that's a different story now, because the Nerds kind of won. It would be like Revenge of the Jocks, right? Like there needs to be some sort of reboot of that. Yeah, for sure. Because Nerds have kind of taken over the world, whether it's you could actually oh my God, that's a great idea. You should tweet that.
Well, I actually had an idea for the movie too, but then I feel like I'm helping the problem, which is all these reboots. I'm always like, because every time they reboot something, I'm always like, okay, here we go again.
But look at Stranger Things. They took a lot of influences from a lot of different cool things. You could certainly write a script that harkens back to Revenge of the Nerds, but you don't need to do Revenge of the Nerds. You can do your own original thing, and I think that's anything is an influence of stuff that came before it. I mean, Star Wars is an amalgam of so many different things. I mean, Darth Vader is effectively Doctor Doom. like Doctor Doom from the Fantastic Four comics, to connect those, like a scarred figure encased in metal with a flowing cape. The color scheme's a little different. It's black. Doctor Doom was gray and green. But like all these things are slight influences. There's no reason why you couldn't sit down sit down and bang out a script that would be kind of reminiscent of Revenge of the Nerds, but commenting on how nerd culture has changed today. I'd go see that movie.
Well, maybe you've just given me another idea, Chris Gore.
Do it.
Maybe.
Do it. Do it. There's no reason, man. Like I was like, like when I did my Big Fat Independent Movie, I wanted to make a, spoof comedy, because whenever I feel like a genre is dead, because at the time I made that movie in 2005, I was like, independent movies are kind of dead. Hollywood won. In the late 90s, Hollywood basically beat the crap out of indie filmmakers, and, a good one will come along and they'll immediately get snapped up by the studios. Which is fine with me. I like to see indie filmmakers make money. I love when I see that happen. But like the genre was kind of dead, and I feel like when a genre is dead, that's when you do a spoof comedy about that genre. Blazing Saddles, was spoofing westerns in the late 70s, in the early 70s, because the western was dead, right? So I thought, well, indie film is kind of dead, this thing, and it's also become cliche, the road. So that's why I did my Big Fat Independent Movie. But I think independent film has definitely evolved and changed because of technology, and I think that there are also, more resources for indie filmmakers, whether it's crowdfunding with getting money, whether it's, using new technology, like making a movie with an iPhone, like they did with Tangerine, made a film with the iPhone 5S. Or whether it's distribution and saying, I'm just going to put my movie on VHX or iTunes, and you can do that. So a filmmaker with an iPhone can basically has the power to make a movie, promote their movie, and sell their movie from their phone.
Yeah, I actually had Sean Baker on, who was a writer-director of Tangerine, and it's still my most popular episode. And, he was actually saying that, he had to convince everybody on set, though, because he said, when he showed up and said, hey, we're going to shoot this on an iPhone, they were like, what? And then he's like, no, trust me. He's like, it's going to turn out a lot better than you think it is.
Yeah, no, and it did. I love that film. I mean, I really admire that. Like it's my goal in the next year or so to actually make a feature film I'll make it with the iPhone 6. I'll upgrade. But no, I want to make a feature film with an iPhone as just an exercise to see how to do it. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to know how to do that thing, because I really think that this sort of mid-level of indie filmmaking is kind of dead, like $10 million movies. And I think that lo-fi films, like movies that are made for like under $150,000, under, a couple $100,000, like that's actually coming on the horizon. I feel like that's going to be a big thing. Like one of those movies is going to break out and actually be a mainstream success financially. I'm not sure exactly how much of a financial success Tangerine was, but it was certainly a creative success, having seen the film.
So, you mentioned actually making a film with the iPhone 6. Do you have, something in mind, or do you have a script already written?
I absolutely have something in mind, and I am working on a script. But, I'll see how much free time I have. If the film Kickstarter fails, I'll have plenty of free time to make that movie.
And by the way, you mentioned something else too about the budgets for a film. And talking with filmmakers on this podcast, that's something we always go back and forth about is, whatever happened to these medium range budgets, you know what I mean? It's either almost like all or nothing now. Either you have $100 million or you have like 10,000.
Well, see, that's what sucks, is because I look at a filmmaker like Josh Trank, who I really loved Chronicle. I thought Chronicle showed a lot of promise. It was like, it's the best live action Akira movie ever made, right? And there was some dark, fun stuff in that. So I'm a big fan of that film. So they sort of plucked him from making this small movie into making a big budget, what's intended to be a summer tentpole film, with a big superhero franchise from Marvel. And Josh Trank needed kind of another middle movie. They're not developing this talent. I mean, even Chris Nolan went from making he went from making this little movie Following, which was like a 16 millimeter black and white movie for like less than $100,000. He made that film. Then he made Memento, who was like $1 million movie. Then he made a studio film that was a talkie. What was that one with Robin Williams? And Al Pacino. Yeah, so he kind of like moved up. Chris Nolan had the opportunity to move up the scale slowly and kind of like he definitely got to scale up and learn the process. And Josh Trank kind of got thrown to the wolves. He made this one film and then plucked from that to make something huge. I don't know that that's possible. I think we're a new generation of filmmakers needs definitely time to make some of those mistakes until they can make something big. I mean, not everyone can be a genius out of the gate. It's rough.
Yeah, I completely agree, Chris. It kind of reminds me, too, when YouTube stars, YouTube personalities are sort of plucked from YouTube to be put in different things. They have a hard time adjusting because, I have a couple of friends who are agents of some of these YouTube stars, and he says, they want them to come in and do commercials or come in and do this or that. Then they're not used to that whole filmmaking process. They're used to, putting a camera up and just doing their whatever their personality is, you know what I mean? And when they have to do something different, it's almost like there needs to be an adjustment process. Yeah,
absolutely. It's always like, look, what do they say? You do something for 10,000 hours and then you're good at it. You know what I mean? That's what they say, like in doing like stand-up comedy, like or anything, whether it's writing, whatever. Once you've gotten your 10,000 hours of doing that thing you're pretty good at doing that thing. If you've had success along the way. So I think that's critical.
And speaking of the whole 10,000 hour thing, I want to actually ask about your writing style. Because I mentioned we mentioned My Big Fat Independent Movie, which you co-wrote and co-produced,
right? And
we talked about the script that you're working on. I wanted to ask Chris, what is your writing style? Do you have a certain sort of paradigm you go from?
Well, I mean, when it comes to my writing about film, I'm just very honest. You know what I mean? I just very like. Tell it like it is. I'm a big fan of the gonzo journalists, like Hunter S. Thompson. So that's where I draw my inspiration. And I'm also was a big fan of Bukowski in college, but of course, who wasn't, right? But I don't know. I mean, that's sort of my writing style, and I tend to at least with stuff that I write, I don't want to. I try to avoid cliche or go, what's the thing that What's the opposite of that thing that you always see? What's the opposite of the cliche? Cliches and stereotypes are just lazy to me. So, and also not really reflective of the real world. So I don't know. I just tend to go the other direction.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because James Gunn, who, he's done Guardians of the Galaxy and everything, he actually was, talking about, writing styles, and it got me to thinking too, because he once said that, the most successful people that he knew were also the most unhappy. And he said the reason was because they're always obsessed about their career, and they're always worried about the next time they're going to get at bat, and they're always working towards the next thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So how, I want to ask you, Chris, how do you, find the time, to do, because I know you do so many different projects, you have so much going on. So how do you balance everything out?
Oh my God. I don't know. I have to pay the rent. So, I will take freelance jobs that are not the ideal or not necessarily my passion, but, I'll do that. I was fortunate enough, having been on Attack of the Show and G4, opportunities will kind of come my way, which I'm really grateful for. So I feel very lucky in that realm. But I don't know. I sort of like, this sounds really weird, and I learned this from Neil Gaiman, but like, he just made a list of all the things he wanted to do, and then he just did the next thing on the list. It was like, write a comic book, write a novel, write a movie. Like, he just like, I have a list of things I want to do, literally a list. Relaunch Film Threat, launch the Film Threat Podcast Network, create the Film Threat app, complete the Film Threat documentary, finish the Film Threat book, which I'm writing a book about my experiences doing Film Threat magazine in the 90s. It's called Film Threat Sucks. That's also the title of the documentary. And then after that, make a movie with an iPhone. So I just have a list of things I'm doing, and just everything I do kind of just goes toward those goals. And then little opportunities will come by here and there. So I'll divert and go, well, I got to make money to pay the rent, so I'm going to do this other job, or I'm going to write this other thing. But, I don't know, make a list of things to do. Now, actually, this is a thing. I'll give you a weird tip. I learned this from Olympic athletes, and I learned this like in the 80s. Okay. So Olympic athletes will take like a tiny slip of paper and they'll write their goals. It's like, run a mile in X number of minutes, whatever it is, they're specific goals. It has to be measurable goal, right? It can't be like be happy, because what's the criteria by which you measure that you're happy? It's ridiculous. You have to have a measurable goal. Write it on like a business card size piece of paper. I mean, what I would do is actually type it on the computer, and I would print it out really small type, like 6 or 8 point type. I fold it up and I put it in my wallet. Because pretty much on a daily basis, you go to your wallet, right? And this is something these Olympic athletes would do. So they look in their wallet, you're buying whatever. You always see that list. It's always in front of you, right? Like a Post-it note you put on your computer, whatever works for you. If you think it, ink it, write it down, make a list, and then it's like your focus, because you're seeing this in front of your face every day. You see it in your wallet, you see it on the Post-it note near your computer. Your brain begins to just like, well, I'm going to do things that are going to work towards that goal. If you really want to get if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, there's a really good book called Getting Things Done. Because it's weird. Like I'm into like I do read a lot of film books, but I also like wonky business books and work efficiency books and life books. Anything that's sort of in the realm of self-improvement. I've always got sort of different books going. I'm reading a book about Star Trek right now, but then I've also got another book going about just reaching goals and stuff. So I kind of balance the two. But having that piece of paper in your wallet is just like really helpful. And Neil Gaiman just make a list. Here's the list. I'm just gonna do the next thing that's on the list. But I also make that list once a year, and I make it on January 1st. It's sort of like a time of the year of like reflection, like, oh, what did I do last year? What's my plan for this year? And then I just do that. So,
well, that's a really good idea, Chris.
Yeah. Make a list, put it in your pocket, always carry it with you. The list will begin to annoy you. And at the end of the year, this list is really tattered, and I've saved every single one since like the late 80s. I have like all these like little, they're like just like little pieces of paper that I've lit. And you'll see like I'm a little too ambitious. I'll get like only about half the things done on the list. So I've got like all these ambitious goals, but by the end of the year, it's like, well, but I did do half of those things. So that's not too bad.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what Paddy Chayefsky used to do when he used to have a theme that he would keep with every screenplay, and he'd put it above his desk, and he'd always go back to that whenever he was like confused about anything in the screenplay, or you know what I mean, like anything was going to happen, he'd always go back to that theme. It kind of reminds me, it's almost like a theme to-do list. What you were just describing to me.
Oh no, that's good. That's good. Wow, I like that tip.
Oh, I'm glad I could give you a tip right back. That's actually
that's cool, man. No, that's a really good. I never thought of that. Like, if you're working on a script, definitely, just throw down the theme.
Yeah, and I once I heard that, I was like, wow, that is really awesome. But then again, he is Paddy Chayefsky, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So Chris, I want to talk to you about the Film Threat Kickstarter.
Sure.
Because honestly, I'm so glad to see it back. I'm so glad to see you, launching Film Threat again, because I think it's important to have options, out there. When you look at independent film anymore, I mean, I can name probably 2 or 3 magazines that are still left.
Yeah, it's a little disheartening. I mean, it's like, and the thing is this, I did the Kickstarter. This is the second Kickstarter. I did a Kickstarter in April of 2015, and it failed. Okay. So I was like, well, I guess the world just doesn't want Film Threat. And I made a lot of mistakes in that campaign. I was trying to do too much, and I was going for an amount of money that people felt was unreasonable. And even though like that money I budgeted out, like that would have financed Film Threat at least for the first year, and we would have like gotten everything back online again. But I was like, all right, well, if people don't want Film Threat, fine. But over the last year, people have been bugging me nonstop. Like, you got to bring it back. You got to bring it back. The world needs it. And I was like, all right, I'm doing it. So that's why I did launch this new campaign, specifically because I had so many people just encourage me. I had a few people, like this web designer said, look, I can do like a prototype design that you can show to people, and I'll just put in a little work for free, just to like show you what it can be. So we do have like this prototype design. If you actually contribute to the campaign, if you go to filmthreat.com, I'll send you a private link with a password where you can actually look at what the website will look like. And it looks very upscale. I want it to look like an actual magazine.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Because it actually looks like a magazine. I am going to back the Kickstarter. I have when you actually just mentioned that, I was like, wait, I actually meant to back that. But
it's cool. You should get look, don't look at it as backing Film Threat. Look at it as like, I'm going to get a T-shirt or I'm going to get a DVD. And one of the things I've opened up the Film Threat archives so that you can actually get like original art that was used in Film Threat magazine. So there's actually some really cool, which you could probably sell on eBay for a lot more money than you paid for it. So I don't know. Like I'm just sort of saying like this is kind of our pledge drive. Like help us out so we can get Film Threat back online. And then I just feel like when you look at the landscape of websites that write about film, there's definitely something missing. You know what I mean? Like, because most of these sites, this is how Film Threat always operated differently than other sites is, movies coming out and a publicist or a studio will contact a website and say, hey, this movie's coming out on this day, come to a screening, whatever. So all these websites that write about film, and there are more film websites out there now than there are movies being made, they all pretty much cover the same stuff. They cover the same stuff because that's what's coming out. But what they're not doing, which was always, I felt my mission, was to discover filmmakers. Like Richard Linklater sent me a VHS cut, a rough cut of his movie Slacker, like in 1989, 1990, around there. He was just this kid filmmaker from Austin, Texas, who's like, hey, I think you might like this movie. And of course, Slacker, I think, is brilliant. It's one of my absolute favorite independent films ever made. And I thought Boyhood really deserved the Oscar. I thought that was, I don't know. I always loved Richard Linklater because he's a guy that takes a lot of risks. But there's nowhere to do that. I don't know how a filmmaker who's just made a movie gets any kind of attention other than screaming at their friends on social media. So what Film Threat always did was champion and actually seek out up-and-coming filmmakers.
Yeah, that's something we touch a lot about on here is, how do you distribute a movie? How do you get attention? How do you do all these things? Social media is basically the go-to for everybody because one, it's free for the most part, unless you're paying for Facebook ads. But you're also it's just the way to start conversations,
Yeah.
And then you have a website with a big buy now button on there. Like a friend of mine, Jason Brubaker, he talks a lot about this. This is because he works for a distributor and he does a lot of online stuff for filmmakers. But yeah, I agree with you, Chris. There needs to be somewhere where like a magazine is showcasing new filmmakers coming out. Like I said, there's about 3 or 4 magazines that I can still even just name off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, there's not a lot out there, and I think that the other thing that was Film Threat's strength was doing humor, doing things with a sense of humor, so that whenever we did write about mainstream movies or Hollywood films, we would try to do it in a way that was different than what everyone else was doing, number one. And then secondly, just had a sense of humor. I think having a sense of humor is very important. And I think that in the realm of people who write about film, they really take themselves seriously, which is disheartening. And I think that that's what separated Film Threat from that group for the most part is I have a sense of humor about myself. You know what I mean? I take my work seriously, but I have a sense of humor, and I think that that's what's missing. A lot of these guys, man, they take themselves seriously.
Yeah, I concur on that one because where can people check out the Film Threat Kickstarter?
Just go to filmthreat.com. It'll point you right to it. And look, donate what you can, but look at it as look, I want to get a weird DVD. I'm gonna get the DVD, or cool, I could use an exclusive T-shirt because the T-shirt's being designed by this guy Chris Prynowski, so who is founder of Titmouse Animation Studios and responsible for many of the Adult Swim animated shows. So just look at it as hey, I just want to pick up something cool in the realm of film, and then you're also helping Film Threat make a comeback.
And I will link to the Kickstarter in the show notes, everyone. Chris, we had some questions come in. Would you mind taking a few?
Let's do it. Let's do the questions.
The first question comes in from Podcast Reviews. Basically, the question is, besides technology, in 30 years since Film Threat started, what elements to indie filmmaking have you seen change for better or the worse?
Well, the thing that is the best is technology. More than anything, technology has changed, and now filmmakers, you don't need a particularly large budget to actually make a movie run on your phone. I think what has changed for the worse is distribution. I think it's really difficult, even though filmmakers have access to distribution, actually getting attention and shelf space and sort of mind share, as you might call it in the world of marketing, that's actually the more difficult thing to get. We had a DVD distribution label in the early 2000s, and we distributed 30 different movies on DVD, and part of the problem with those was that we just didn't have the shelf space. Netflix would buy our movies, but almost no one else. Getting retail shelf space was kind of impossible. So I think that's the big challenge for filmmakers now is how do you actually get that attention? I think getting written about in another outlet that isn't you talking about yourself is always helpful. The other thing is, just getting into a film festival that will get attention. That helps. But that's something that I think is a huge struggle at the moment. And also it's a global market now, which is why so many movies that are made, it's changed filmmaking in some ways for the better, in other ways for the worse. But I think distribution is still a problem that we need to grapple with.
Yeah, I concur, Chris. I've just seen other filmmakers too. They're always wondering, should I spend money and try to get at least one theatrical showing of this? Should we just go all digital download from a website? And that's something that I think a lot of people do grapple with.
Yeah. No, that is still a struggle and will be ongoing.
The second question that came in, Chris, is are you going to start doing Podcrash again?
Yeah, actually what I'm doing is I'm relaunching the Film Threat. I'm launching the Film Threat Podcast Network. And some of the podcasts we're going to be doing a general Film Threat podcast that's going to be, interviewing guests. I'm also going to be doing a podcast that's about every episode of that podcast, I'm going to talk about one issue of Film Threat. So when you go to the website, you'll see there's an issue of the print edition of Film Threat magazine, and you can download it as a PDF and read it. And there'll be a podcast you can click, and I'll tell you everything about the making of that issue of Film Threat. I don't know what the name of that podcast is going to be. Then we're going to do a podcast called Blockbuster Busters. That's all about talking about blockbuster movies. Then there's another and then I'm going to do Podcrash. So the podcast network is basically a bunch of podcasts all sharing resources. So we're all, promoting each other, but then, it's a place where you can listen to all this stuff. But yeah, if the Film Threat Kickstarter happens, Podcrash will return as a podcast as part of the network.
Cool. Because this is kind of like an episode of Podcrash, right?
In a way, yeah, it would be.
So, and the third question that came in, Chris, was what tips could you give to somebody for crowdfunding?
Oh, God. I'm like the worst person to ask for that because I've never actually done a successful campaign. I've done 3 campaigns, and, well, this is my 3rd campaign. And the previous 2 did not succeed. So I don't know that I have good advice. I mean, the one thing is just I will like warn you, it's a full-time job. It's something that you never feel like you're doing enough. No matter how much you're doing, it's never enough. I do know some of the statistics that, you know, if you can reach 50% of your funding with 2 weeks to go, your chances of succeeding are 90%. I think it's important to get some big donors at the top and like actually create like a list so that when you're going to launch, the day you launch, the day you launch, you've already let people know for weeks in advance, like, you know, Monday, September 1st, we're going to, you know, launch our Kickstarter, whatever the date is, let people know in advance. Also have like some rewards that are specifically for people that jump in early. So one of the things I did was when my last Kickstarter failed, I sent an email out to everybody. I said, give me your address. I'm going to send you something for free. Even though I'm like not obligated to do this, I'm going to send you a film threat button just for fun that says save film threat as a thank you for, even though we didn't succeed, I'm going to spend my own money and I'm going to get these buttons made and I'm going to send it to you. I said, and then it was like people were saying, oh, this is really cool. If you do it again, I want to do it. So I kept in touch. So even though my campaign failed, it kind of told me what people wanted, like, you know, like, oh, they prefer this instead of that. I've got to do much cooler rewards, you know, like it. So having a failed, here's my tip. If you have a Kickstarter campaign that fails, that'll tell you what to do for the next one.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. Because whenever, I mean, I've helped out filmmakers too with their crowdfunding campaigns. Because I've been doing this for so long, and in fact, that's how you and I originally met. Was back in way back in like 2010 or 2011. That's when you and I met for the first time. I actually had made a TV pilot, and I had crowdfunded it, and that's how you and I started talking to one another. And then you said, like, stop talking to me, kid. And I said, all right, Mr. Gore. But no, you were awesome to talk to. You were very supportive, and but yeah, crowdfunding, I'm so glad now it's in the zeitgeist. But the only downside is like every filmmaker now has a Kickstarter Kickstarter. And it's like, it's constantly on my Twitter feed, like, hey, Dave, you don't know me, but can you donate to my Kickstarter?
It's a bunch of broke people trying to get money. So it's rough. I think that indie filmmaking is probably the most difficult kind of crowdfunding unless you have, celebrity talent attached, like when they did the Super Troopers 2 crowdfunding and they raised like, $4 million in like a week? That was pretty crazy. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had one of the troopers on. Eric Stohansky came on the podcast, and we were talking about the campaign and everything like that. And he was blown away by how quickly they were able to get to even $1 million.
Yeah, no, it was crazy.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Chris, we've been talking for about 40 minutes or so now. Is there anything in closing that you maybe wanted to discuss and we get a chance to, or is there any sort of thing you want to say just to put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
No, just I really appreciate you taking an interest and have me talk to you on your podcast, and hope people will go to filmthreat.com and check out the campaign and pick up some original art from Film Threat. I think that's probably the best value. Because that's something that I believe will increase in value, and if you go there, you'll eventually. I hope we make 50% this week so that we can release the trailer, because the trailer for the Film Threat doc is pretty cool. It's like a 90s period piece, so and it's made from 100 hours of VHS footage, 5,000 photographs, and our first stretch goal, if we get the amount for Film Threat to bring Film Threat back, any money that goes above that, the first 10,000 is going to go towards shooting the documentary. We're going to be shooting new interviews with people, so that's the plan with that. I'll actually, once I get out the phone, I'll send you a private link to the sizzle reel. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate that, man.
Since you said you're going to donate.
I promise
That's
I
awesome.
will. Otherwise, you have to come find me and break my legs. But
I'll Awesome.
But Chris, where can people find you out online?
You can find me at that Chris Gore on Twitter, Instagram, thatchrisgore.com. You can also go to filmthreat.com and check out the campaign. And thanks, Dave, for talking to me.
Oh, Chris, thanks a lot for coming on, man. Like I said, I was always, remembered you, supporting me back in 2010. And I won't forget that. And everyone, DaveBullis.com, Twitter, it's at Dave_Bullis. Please go check out filmthreat.com. Chris has a fantastic Kickstarter going, and it really does support independent film, which is what this whole podcast, our whole theme is about. Chris Gore, I wish you the best of luck,
All right,
sir.
Thank you so much.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.